Hello everybody and welcome along to another episode of the LOPSided Podcast. Today I'm joined by Verity Jackson-Grant to discuss innovative insurance policies and how this quickly evolving insurance-backed solutions market is enabling law firms not only to share more risk with clients, but offset their risk with specialist policies. Are these policies really a cheat code for commercial pricing solutions? And can they really be a USP for law firms in a competitive legal landscape?
Daddy, who is Verity Jackson-Grant?
Verity Jackson-Grant has decades of experience working in the legal industry. Verity brings experience from both sides of the fence. Prior to her current role as head of pricing at Simmons and Simmons, she was a director at a leading litigation broker, where she worked with lawyers and their clients to develop financial solutions for the fees incurred in bringing commercial claims. She began her career as an underwriter of AT Insurance at the origins of the industry and has also spent time at two other well-known law firms. The LOPSided Podcast, for legal operations professionals by legal operations professionals. Hi everybody, welcome along to the LOPSided Podcast, the podcast for legal operations professionals by legal operations professionals. Today I'm joined by Verity Jackson-Grant.
The one and only.
How are you doing?
I'm all right, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. So, talk to me. Give me a bit of background. You've got quite an interesting career background, right? Poacher come gamekeeper?
Something like that.
Back to gamekeeper.
I've just gone where the wind's blown me, really.
Yeah. Okay, well, give us a quick tweet length on that.
Okay, so initially I did a law degree, but quickly realised I didn't want to be a lawyer whilst I was studying law, but I did enjoy the course. And I fell into, after the event, legal expenses at the point of the industry where it was brand new and there weren't really many people doing it. And it meant that even coming in quite young at the time, you had quite a lot of freedom because there was nobody else that wanted to pick up those jobs. So I did, after the event, insurance as an underwriter for a little while. Well, I was a claims manager first and then an underwriter for a little while. And then I moved into brokering.
Okay.
And then there came a time when I was working on a product for Mishcon de Reya that was effectively a wrapper around the litigation funding and after the event insurance market. And I was helping them to launch that. It was called Mishcon Protect at the time. And a job came up internally in business development there. So I moved across to that. And I worked in business development there and then later at Herbert Smith Freehills, mainly in the disputes teams, as you know.
Yep.
Because you were with me.
Dream team.
So I did business development for disputes for quite a long time. And then I had the opportunity to go back to being a broker of litigation funding and after event insurance at the Judge. So I went there as a director for about 18 months, 2 years. Really enjoyed the role, but felt like I missed that law firm environment. Obviously a glutton for punishment.
Yeah.
So as a stopgap, I did a contract role at Simmons and Simmons in their BD team. And when the contract came to an end, I was asked what I might do if I stayed. Could I see a role for me there? So I stole some of your ideas, stole some ideas from some other people, and I wrote.
Good old plagiarism, right?
Yeah. Well, I could see that they were at the time they were missing. There was a bit of a missing piece in the puzzle where they were doing some really great client stuff. They had a good finance team and they were doing what they could with pricing. But their pricing team that they had historically had moved on and they hadn't quite filled that gap. And there was no one really making that connection between what the client might want and the price, other than the partners that were doing the work. And it's quite a heavy toll, I think, on the lawyers whilst they're managing the case to do the pricing as well. So I came up with a job spec around the commercial conversations with clients.
Okay.
So that's what I do now.
So on to you, the 3 questions I asked every guest. Who's your hero?
You, Obs.
Who's your real hero?
Oh, God, you could have given me a heads up on that one. Are we talking about in the industry or more generally?
I think we can go life, we can go commercial, professional, whatever.
Okay, well...
Okay, let's go personal, actually.
Let's go personal.
Who's inspired you through life?
I think there's lots of people, but I think I'll look closest to home for inspiration because I've got a really, I think, quite inspiring family. My mum is She's formidable in terms of getting stuff done. And I've always seen growing up that if you want something to happen, then actually the best way to do it is to just get it done yourself.
Absolutely.
And then I've got a sister who's an Olympic gymnast. I've got another sister who's the CEO of the Youth Justice Board. I've got a brother who was a champion ice skater and then owns his own business. So I think my dad is amazing. My dad is the king of the family. So I think
amazing.
I think I'd look close to home for my
so kind of a family of heroes, really.
Indeed.
So what's your biggest accomplishment?
Do you know, when I was asked that in my first, I'm going off on a tangent here. When I was asked that in my first job interview, I had nothing to say, and I think I said passing my driving test. Now I think I would say my biggest accomplishment, if assuming we're not talking about the wonderful children I've spawned or anything like that, I think has to be setting up the new look pricing team at Simmons. I think has been quite an accomplishment. We've gone from just me having an idea of how I might make our client service better, to having sort of 4 people in the team now, and working really well with the different functions and bringing it all together. I think is probably that's probably mine.
That's amplifies the quality of what you've done at Simmons. I obviously know firsthand the work at HSF and the work at the Judge and whatnot, and there's been some great accomplishments there. So fantastic.
Yeah.
Most importantly, which song would you sing on a team karaoke night out?
Oh, I'm going to go with Salt and Pepper Shoot.
Bit salt and pepper. Didn't see that one coming. So, getting into it, the topic in question. So, we talk about pricing a lot, and on the podcast we've spoken to quite a few pricing experts a lot across the industry. But what I think is really fascinating here is we're going to talk about innovative insurance-backed solutions. So somewhat of a disruption to the pricing offering, if you will. And I suppose on that, to articulate it as I've written it down here, are innovative insurance-backed solutions a cheat code for commercial pricing? Do you think? And
that takes me a few minutes to decipher in my brain. I think we probably need to step back and just talk a little bit through what you mean by that. Now, I'm assuming you mean sort of insurance behind a law firm taking. Assume you mean in the context of a law firm where a law firm is taking a risk, like a conditional fee agreement or a damage-based agreement, or another no win or no success, no fee.
Yeah, so
type arrangement.
At the risk of bamboozling listeners at an early point, the thing about insurance-backed solutions, as you know better than anybody, is the evolution of them and how far they've come from your conventional after the event insurance that would, indemnify law firms against adverse costs, disbursement exposure, a client's own costs, I should say, and into this realm of these unbelievably useful solutions such as security of the costs cover and judgment preservation insurance. So the things you can do truly after the event whilst you're still in flight. So probably let's start at the base and talk about, touched on a couple of those, but what insurance-backed solutions, or which insurance-backed solutions are the ones that you think are most prevalent right now in the market? What are they? What do they do? And how are they changing clients?
I think it depends what area of the market you're looking at. I think most of the market is quite comfortable with the idea of after the event insurance for opponents' costs, so adverse costs insurance, and disbursements insurance, and certainly anyone that's used litigation funding is likely to be comfortable with those. I think it's less well known that a client can insure their own fees. And then I think it's only really known amongst the dispute circles that you can do a no-win, no-fee agreement and insure the law firm's fees behind the scenes, which so when you start talking about things like judgment preservation insurance, I think that's really a very specialist insurance tool that only certain law firms probably know about. Maybe more so recently because there's been a big potential claim in that area.
Is that the Quinn Emanuel one? There's a big Quinn with public knowledge. Quinn's
the IBM one in the US is what I was.
Okay.
Is what I was thinking about. But those sorts of claims only serve to prove the point as to why these insurances are there and are necessary. So I think for most people that the most prevalent insurance-backed solutions will be. Or the most interesting, perhaps, for the most people are probably those that sit behind a law firm risk retainer, so that the law firm can offer the client a no-win, no-fee or a no-win, low-fee, but hedge some of their risk behind the scenes so that it's not such a daunting task for them and so that the downside isn't so great. I think those are probably my favourite options.
And kind of merging the BD business development aspects of your experience with the now commercial pricing piece. That client piece around, share the risk. There's no huge legal bill coming your way, whether we win or not. The way it incentivizes law firms to go after the right. Well, they'll obviously go after the right decision, but really put their money where their mouth is, literally.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a matter of explaining the different options that might be available to the client, and then the pricing becomes really client-led because you have that conversation about what's important to you. Is it cash flow preservation? Is it actually risk management? Is it that you're not going to go for this? You're not going to bring these matters unless there's no cost and there's no downside. What is it that's important? And once you've had that conversation with the client, it's easier to present, say, 3 options of how you might cut and dice the law firm's retainer, any necessary insurance, whether it's for the client directly or behind the law firm, any litigation funding, for example. That comes together quite easily once you've had the discussion. You understand what the pressure points are for the client. And when you do it that way, the client feels like because they have been involved in the decision, and it's a collaboration rather than us saying our price is this. It's working together to arrive at a pricing structure that works for both parties. And quite often using these kind of tools, what works for the client works for the law firm. So you don't have that you don't have that sort of mismatched power that you might think you have.
And is this? Would you still consider this as a USP? I mean, is the feedback, the response you're getting from clients that this kind of commercial flexibility, if you will, is it separating you from, a panel of firms when you're looking at particular matters or particular opportunities?
I think so. I think it's still relatively early days for these kind of arrangements. I mean, you and I have tried for years to make them mainstream, but I don't think they are mainstream. And when you're talking to clients about them, quite often you are taking them through the basics of them. So they obviously haven't heard about them from other people. Or if they have, it's been posed in a different way.
But that's fascinating on its own. I mean, just to go back a step, because I might be wrong here, but lawyers do have a professional obligation to notify their clients of the possibility of AT insurance, do they not?
Well, the SRA regulations have condensed somewhat, so they're much more sort of broad stroke. But I agree, they need to. What are the phrases now? They're things like, acts in the best interest of the client, act with integrity. All of these things, I think, play to the fact that they should be talking to the client about the options available on the pricing front and the options that might be there to protect the client against certain risks and to bring the matter in the most commercially appropriate way. So I would say there is an obligation on the law firms. There was perhaps previously a more clear-cut obligation. But even then, I mean, when the SRA rules were quite clear and specific about this, I was doing the rounds as a broker, and I think the number of law firms that weren't really doing their duty, they were just putting a sentence into an engagement letter. I think the majority of law firms were probably in that camp back then. Now, I think there's much more understanding, but I still think there's more that a lot of firms could be doing.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, isn't it? Thinking about the insurance piece a lot more, and how it does kind of allow an element of risk transfer, and it takes you back to ultimately, what's the catalyst of looking at these insurances, which is, to your earlier point, no win, no fee, no win, low fee options for clients. And this kind of mindset shift, if you will, that in the earlier days, maybe back when you were starting out as well, was always associated with your kind of high street law firms, no win, no fee, injured at work. But it's a huge corporate opportunity now, isn't it, to bring some of that thinking along to these big multi-million pound opportunities.
Such a slow burn, though, because I feel like I've been saying for 15 years now that these options are available for commercial clients and corporate clients. And I mean, as you say, when I started out, I mean, I'm so old that actually the no win, no fee sort of market was personal injury, as you say, slip and trip, RTA, road traffic accident kind of stuff. And then it was with the birth of litigation funding, or the evolution of litigation funding, that we started talking about using insurance in the same sort of sphere, these big commercial litigations. But for years, in my own experience, lawyers were saying to me that their clients weren't that interested. But I think that's because they didn't really understand it, and they didn't. Yeah. I don't mean to be disparaging, but they didn't really understand it themselves, and so they weren't comfortable having that discussion with clients. I think now there's much better knowledge about it. There's much more sophisticated market, both on the client side and within the law firms. But then you've got people like me and people like you that have those client-facing discussions on behalf of the lawyers. It takes the burden off, and it just means that there is better information for everyone, better knowledge for everyone.
Yeah, and to your point, it's not necessarily common knowledge, and it's not something that's rolled out across the industry. But I mean, those who have adopted early are doing pretty well out of it, aren't they?
Yeah, well, I think it's, for the right kind of cases, it's a no-brainer. If you've got, especially with litigation funding as the other competitor to how you're structuring your pricing, if you've got a matter that is good enough for litigation funding, it should be good enough for the law firm to take some risk within reason, accepting that the law firm is not the same kind of beast as a litigation funder. But if the prospects and the value is there for a litigation funder to be interested, then there's no reason why a law firm shouldn't take a piece of that pie and work with the funder, or instead of the funder in some matters. And it's not that big a jump from there to say, well, I don't really want to take all of the risk. Is there a way of protecting some of that risk and moving into insurance that way?
Yeah, and I think litigation funding, which will be a separate podcast, cheeky plug there. Litigation funding, for people that don't know what that is, it's kind of a third party coming in and funding the matter for a client in exchange for a percentage of the spoils, to put it bluntly. And legal expense insurance in particular was usually something that would sit on the back of that. But with this emergence of all of these real innovative insurance-based solutions, is it becoming more and more of a disruptor of an industry in litigation funding that's kind of been able to go about its business unchallenged over the last 5 to 10 years? Is it the main disruptor of that now? Are people using it instead of litigation funding?
I don't think it is a disruptor. I think it's a facilitator. I think both facilitate the other. And I think most cases now where there's one, there might be the other. So I don't see them as competing directly, because I see them as meeting different needs. I mean, litigation funding is a cash flow solution, where insurance is more of a hedging of risk. Typically, a funder and an insurer would want to share some risk and would want the law firm to be involved. So it's more of a club that facilitates more options by mix and matching how you use each of the tools, rather than an either or. Of course, there are some situations where litigation funding might now be cast aside in favour of insurance,
because it's more cost efficient as well.
Because it's more cost efficient.
Yeah.
But often, I mean, there's only so many matters that can happen because of the cash flow burden on the law firm in that scenario, or on the client if they're paying the fees and the insurance is just protecting them. So I think there's a small patch of grass where it's either or. And then the rest of the playing field is a combination of both. And of course, what you typically have is some form of insurance behind a litigation funder, either as a protective wrap around their fund or as after the event insurance for adverse costs attached to it. So I don't think it's as clear cut as either or anymore. I think the market has developed to some sort of sophisticated trading place where you have a combination of them all.
So just thinking about the legal operations angle of this, and for those legal operations professionals who are maybe looking through the different podcasts that we've got on file and looking at this one and thinking, okay, well, not sure I really understand that. What can you say is the true value for a pricing person in a law firm of understanding the capabilities of legal expense insurance and or litigation funding, and what that can add to their offering internally and externally? I think
if you're doing anything to do with disputes, I think we can separate transactional for the purpose of this conversation, although we can talk about insurance and transactional if you want after. But certainly if you're dealing in pricing for disputes, even if you're on defence matters only, it's hard to see how you can get by in life without interacting with clients about litigation funding or insurance in some way or another. They must be asking questions. But the real value of it, I think, is that it means that you can be more creative and you can come up with pricing mechanisms that work for the client and the law firm. And you can give your client more choice. And ultimately, if you can give your client a choice, you're halfway there to them using you. And you should be giving your client a choice, by the way, right? Absolutely. You absolutely should be. Because Simmons are clearly doing it. We are. But if you can give your client a choice and they start thinking about which choice to use, then you've overcome that hurdle of whether they use you in the first place. Yeah. And you're giving different commercial options. If you want cost certainty, if you want to share risk, it's a really interesting view on that. And so what would your advice be to those pricing people who are great on the commercials and just have no idea around litigation funding and legal expense insurance? Because it's a strange one, isn't it? It doesn't actually really have a home per se in law firms. I mean, I know at Simmons and at HSF it sat in legal operations functions. Yeah, well, it didn't. I mean, at Simmons, when I took the role I took the head of pricing role at Simmons and we started building the team, I sat within business development and I was very keen to ensure, now I've moved across to legal operations because we've created a legal operations team in the meantime. But in both positions, I was really keen to make sure that I stayed client facing and as close to the client work as possible. And so my advice, it goes beyond the litigation funding, the insurance piece, but my advice is to really stay close to the clients and close to the matters if you want to deliver the best service you can for your clients, which is ultimately the best service for your firm, because you need to be thinking beyond the financials to the broader concept of winning work. And litigation funding and insurance and understanding those concepts just gives you more options and more ways to do that. And on the client point, how do you get clients? And I absolutely agree, by the way, that being client facing with this kind of thing is fundamental to being able to get the business more comfortable with how we deploy this. But how do you get a client comfortable with legal expense insurance and with litigation funding if it's the kind of solution that they're probably not going to be overly familiar with? And in some examples, for some of the larger law firms and law firm professionals that may be listening, they'll be working for big corporates who may be used to litigation funders suing their big corporate clients. So how do you get clients comfortable with these options? I think the way that I tend to do it is, I do quite a lot of educational kind of presentations on alternative fee arrangements, just more generally without a particular matter in mind. But I think the key is just boiling it down to the really simple and important benefits of it for that matter or for that client in particular, and offering it as an option in the first place. I mean, no one's ramming it down anyone's throat, but if somebody is interested and likes the idea of it once you've talked them through the benefits, then at that point they can learn more about how it works. So I think from my point of view, you warm them up to the idea just by talking through what the different options. And for me, if they look at it and they say, actually, it's not for us, then that's absolutely fine too, because very happy to do it on a standard hourly rate or whatever other mechanism. There's no personal incentive to use funding or insurance other than the fact that it's quite fun to design something new. So for me, I think it's not ramming it down anyone's throat and not overselling it as the best thing ever. Just showing the flexibility and how you can use it to benefit the client, I think is typically what works the best.
And in terms of that advice, do you think that same advice could be recycled to internal stakeholders, for legal operations professionals, your partners?
Yeah, absolutely. For internal stakeholders, I think the education point is really important. I think the advice of not to dabble is really important, and not to just have the coffee with your mate that at a litigation funder or a brokerage or wherever, and assume that is the best option. I think the education piece and the keeping up to date with how the market's moving is really important. But the internal sell really comes from that ability to win work off the back of better and sort of more choices with the pricing arrangement.
Yeah, and I think in my own experience, a critical part of that is ensuring that lawyers, partners really understand that this isn't a one size fits all. A funder isn't going to fund any matter, no matter how rubbish it is, and or an insurer is not going to insure any matter. And it's that kind of under promise, over deliver to a certain extent, because there are certain criteria that need to be met to be able to obtain litigation funding or legal expense insurance.
Yeah,
so
of course.
Not promising it to a client without knowing that it's a certain type or type of matter, level of merits, level of quantum that a funder or an insurer would look at.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely, I've always said it's a privilege and not a right. You do need to convince the investor, if it's a funder or an insurer, you need to convince them that it's a case that they want to be involved in. And you can't just try and insure a case because it's crap. Because that's not how it works. But I think it's striking that balance between, it's not rocket science, so don't be afraid of it, but do respect that it does take a little bit of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a balance to be struck there. And typically the one of the challenges with these arrangements is it's so flexible and so bespoke that you might actually spend a lot of time getting to grips with it for this matter, and then this matter comes along and it needs a completely different arrangement. So sometimes the knowledge isn't transferable to that matter. So it does take somebody with a bit of experience, I think.
And what would your advice be to pricing functions that are more in their infancy, or that are reading a little bit about this? They're not experts in it, but it's something that's definitely piqued their attention. Any words of advice that you'd give to them, with your Simmons hat on maybe, and the success you've had there?
I think I would say that if you're trying to understand the market, there's some really good sort of websites, and there's loads of good articles. So start with reading a little bit or watching podcasts or some webinars. But if you are about to work on a matter and you've not been involved in the market before, I think I would probably say hook up a broker. Speak to a broker and have them guide you through the process. Now, typically the brokers, they charge once there's something in place, and they typically charge the funder or the insurer. So you don't necessarily need to pay an upfront fee or an amount to have that broker's help. So I don't understand why you wouldn't use one if you're nervous about the market, and more so in insurance, because obviously there are regulations around insurance. It's a regulated industry. So if you're looking to obtain insurance either for your firm or for your client, then my advice is always go to a regulated broker. On the funding side, it's less of a broker market. But if you're new to it, because it's really hard to compare apples with apples, with the way that the funders offer their terms and all of that sort of thing, then I would certainly suggest, if you're not sure, then go through a broker or an introducer.
Yeah, and I think regulation, something you touched on there, is critically important, because generally in a commercial pricing role, from a regulatory point of view, there's nothing in particular that says, don't do this, do that. Like there is when you get into conditional fee arrangements, damages-based agreements, litigation funding, legal expense insurance, whereby, what you're able to do, the levels of which you're able to do they change from country to country, jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So anybody in a global pricing role, you're maybe able to implement it in London or the UK, but not in Japan.
Even in the same country, sometimes domestic lawyers can do something that foreign lawyers can't.
And vice versa.
We've battled that.
We have
a couple of times.
We've battled that quite a few times.
And it's a scary prospect, because a lot of the time within law firms, there is nobody that has that specific knowledge. I mean, HSEF incredibly lucky, because that knowledge sits within the PSL function, but a lot of law firms don't have that, and so if a pricing professional says we can do this, sometimes in some law firms the lawyer might not think to ask whether that is actually lawful, or whether there's regulation that prevents that.
Yeah, and I think from a damages-based agreement, DBA, and a CFA conditional fee arrangement point of view, there have been someone could say embarrassing, but public examples of law firms doing things that they shouldn't do, and it ended up in a huge fine, and obviously, ending up with something that's not enforceable by way of a success fee, which makes it...
Yeah, but it is an easy mistake to make if you're
not. But I think, so if we was to give advice, and you was to give advice, Verity, would it be more, we've spoken around professional support consultants, but it's coupling pricing with those professional support people, those practice people?
I think pricing just can't be a standalone. It can't be a standalone function. It has to couple with the knowledge management, PSC, PSL community. It has to work really closely with that community when you're talking about these kind of arrangements. It has to work closely with finance in some firms, depending on what the setup is. It has to work with the project managers. Most importantly, it has to work with the legal team and the client. So it's a conduit or a hub that needs to work with all of those. You can't just pick a number and say that's the price. And
it's a really good point. And you're kind of getting into the rounds of service delivery there, aren't you? So once you've agreed, it might be a funded matter. I believe personally that the role of a legal project manager becomes equally critical, because it's a kind of tripartite agreement, isn't it? You have a client, you have a law firm, you have a funder, and you need somebody tasked with bringing that all together, being the conduit, the communication between the three pieces, managing the budgets. And, if funders are putting their money where their mouth is, and even insurers, they want to know regularly how a case is getting on, how it's tracking. And
there's a layer of admin as well, which isn't necessarily admin, as you say, it's project management, but there is a layer of reporting. Perhaps that's a better word than admin, but there's a reporting requirement with these types of agreements that you need to keep up with, and often the legal project manager is the best person to do that.
Which again is another example of why, as well as pricing, legal project managers should have some knowledge of this as a part, specifically those, well, not specifically, but especially those working in the contentious area of law.
Yeah, well, I think even if it's a base idea of what the market does, how litigation funding or litigation insurance works, and what's expected of them from a reporting requirements point of view. But I mean, the Post Office documentary recently really helped, I think, in terms of the base knowledge for litigation funding. Insurance is much more of a sort of a mystical market, I think, at the moment. But which I think is somewhat ironic, because obviously insurance has been around a lot longer. And everyone has insurance on things like their home and their car, but there's something about litigation insurance that makes people think that it must be more complex than it is.
Yeah. And final question, stargazing into the future on the evolution of insurance-backed solutions. what do you see coming down the line?
Oh, what do I see? I'd like to think that there will just be more of it. I think we've got quite a stable marketplace at the moment, and we've got really good insurers, and I think that will attract more good insurers. So I'm hoping that on the day-to-day disputes where there's good prospects of success against obviously an opponent that's solvent. I'm hoping that insurance will become more of a natural sort of pricing option. For me, though, I think it's much more likely to grow behind the scenes of law firm retainers than it is direct to clients. So I think the growth area will be behind law firms taking a risk on a conditional fee or a damage-based agreement.
And for clients buying legal services, what would be your advice to those guys?
For clients buying legal services, I think
it is a buyer's market now, right? Let's be honest.
It's a buyer's market. I think I would be encouraging clients to just make sure their needs are met, however that is. Make sure that they understand the different options available to them, and can push their lawyers to come up with different alternatives to meet their needs, and just not settle for the pricing option that's been put in front of them.
Great. Verity Jackson-Grant, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
The LOPSided Podcast. For legal operations professionals, by legal operations professionals. Okay, so Verity, this is the fact or fiction Mythbusters type part of the podcast. And this is where I pose some questions to the expert on the subject in question, just to kind of debunk some of the myths.
All right.
And I mean, we need to do this professionally, so with the technology
sounds good.
Today,
you remember that I'm not fully up to speed with market trends, having had some time.
I think you'd be okay.
Right.
So, are these insurance-backed solutions going to mean the end of the litigation funding market?
No. Do I push the button for that?
Push the button.
Can I see?
You can. And why not?
Bullshit. Why aren't insurance-backed solutions going to mean the end of the litigation funding market? I think there is there's too much opportunity. There's plenty of space for. I said it earlier. There's plenty of space for funders and for insurers. And typically, the funder needs an insurer in some circumstances, and the insurer needs a funder in some circumstances. So I think it's much more of there's much more opportunity for them to get in bed together than there is a reason for them to fight to the death.
Okay. Insurers and brokers, what they're offering is hot air somewhat, and actually being able to place these products, these solutions, is rare.
I had to decide whether that what the button meant. I'm going to push it. And I'm going to say that if you know the market and you know the players and you know enough about your case and you are comfortable that your case has good prospects of success, that you've got a clear route to recovery, that there's money to be made by anybody taking a risk on it, if you've got that kind of case, then you should be able to find funding or insurance, whichever you need. But it does need to be the right kind of case. You cannot expect a litigation funder or an insurer to back a bad case or a case that doesn't have the money at the end of it to pay their premium or their success fee.
Okay. Insurance-backed solutions have the potential to completely de-risk law firms from any type of financial exposure.
Oh, I'm in two minds to push.
Completely de-risk.
It's possible, but it's unlikely.
Okay. It's possible, but it's unlikely.
But to have a completely insured DBA is theoretically possible, but unlikely you'll find an insurer that wants to do it unless it is a brilliant case.
Okay.
Theoretically possible.
Theoretically possible. Okay. Verity Jackson-Grant, thank you very much for your time.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for listening to the LOPSided Podcast. Don't forget to follow us on all social media at the LOPSided Podcast. The LOPSided Podcast. Everything but the law. The views, and furthermore all views, shared by the presenters and guests of this podcast in no way reflect the views of current nor previous companies that employ them. All views and expressions reflect personal views and not those of any affiliated businesses. Listeners should consider these discussions as personal perspectives and not official stances endorsed by any organisations. Always seek professional advice and verify information independently. Thank you for listening.